It was the centrepiece of the 2012 Olympics, but the glory days of what's been renamed the London Stadium seem a long way off. This week, the Mayor Sadiq Khan agreed to take over the former Olympic Stadium and published a highly critical review of how it's been run. In it, he blames the previous Mayor Boris Johnson for saddling the taxpayer, not the tenants West Ham United, with the bill for the stadium's transformation from exclusively hosting athletics to include football. He says that the costs were £133 million more than the incorrect estimates when West Ham signed the deal, and the stadium is now forecast to lose £24 million in 2017 to 18. Well, now the Mayor has agreed to a deal with Newham Council to take over the control of the stadium. Andrew, let's start with you. This was such a high-profile project. What's gone wrong?
It's not a good idea, in my experience, for local authorities to start running stadia. This is the big moral of it. These are private enterprises. Let's be frank, these football clubs, they make a lot of money. They don't really need the state to come in and help them too. And there, of course, there was a big issue about what was going to be done with Olympic assets and so on. I think the lesson I draw from this is let these football clubs, which have got these super business alert directors, big incomes, let them sort these things out themselves and don't saddle council taxpayers with having to deal with what could be for many, many decades now the debts which are left.
So Boris Johnson mishandled this then?
Well, he was mayor at the time, but I'm not making a particularly party political point. There's always this, local authorities always like the idea of the glitz of having big stadia and venues and so on, and they've got lots of big things to do. We're talking later in your programme about housing and transport. Nobody else can do those. It is up to the local authorities and the government to get those right, and they should concentrate on those.
Heidi, Newham Council, the Mayor very much involved in all this, they're to blame?
Well, I don't think so. I mean, I think the report that Sadiq Khan has published this week shows that actually the decisions that Boris Johnson took when he was mayor in response to the legal challenge that happened in 2011, I think he panicked and he was quite quick to say, well, we'll rent it out to West Ham, when perhaps he could have held back a little bit and adopted a more sensible negotiating position. So some of the contracts massively underestimated the costs of transforming the stadium from the Olympic Stadium for use by West Ham Football Club. I think the costs of some of this retractable seating as well, and Boris Johnson's decision to have the Rugby World Cup there in 2015 added delay, disruption and costs. So I do think that Boris Johnson has got some very serious questions to answer. Of course, we all know that he had his eye on developing career opportunities over the river in Westminster, so perhaps we shouldn't be so surprised.
This doesn't make entirely comfortable reading, does it, for Boris Johnson?
Well, look, we shouldn't forget that in the few years since the Olympics, we've had some fantastic events there. Besides the Olympics themselves, we had the World Cup, the Athletics World Cup in 2017, the Rugby World Cup, and of course that whole part of East London has regenerated enormously, partly down to this stadium. So those are all good things. I think the point Lord Adonis made was the most interesting one a moment ago. The way this got set up eventually, in response to a court case, so it wasn't really Boris's choice, he was forced there by a court case in 2011, but it was set up with the state essentially running this, taking the operational risk, but also responsibility for all the revenue, so naming rights and letting out the stadium for rock concerts and so on. It turns out the government, or the state rather, in this case, the Mayor of London, didn't do a very good job. And there is a real lesson there for those people who advocate nationalisation in other areas. The state running what are basically business enterprises doesn't work. Now, Sadiq Khan's line that he's now stepping in and taking it over, I'm afraid to say is a bit disingenuous, because via the London Development Corporation, the London Legacy Development Corporation, he has controlled this because they own most of E20, the stadium owner. So Sadiq Khan has had a year and a half to get this sorted out, and it's regrettable it's taken him that length of time to even look at this. So all this stuff about stepping in now is a bit of a gimmick, I'm afraid.
He has